Do you know what these games have in common? And I don't mean the genre, I don't mean the developer, I don't mean anything about the gameplay. I mean the one thing that connected all these games into a single unified experience for PC players everywhere. Every single one of those games came out with serious hype behind them, with people genuinely excited, with real money being spent. And every single one of them delivered a PC performance situation that made people feel like their hardware was the problem. And here's the thing, it wasn't. But let's go through them, because this is important context for what I actually want to talk about. Stalker 2 dropped in November 2024 on Unreal Engine 5, and DSO's gaming full benchmark confirmed that at 1440p epic settings, the only game that could deliver frame rates above 60 FPS at all times was the RTX 4090. And if you wanted the same thing at 1080p on epic, not 1440p, just 1080p, you needed at minimum an RX 6900 XT or an RTX 3080. Those are not budget cards. And Tom's Hardware took it even further and found that to hit a stable 60 FPS at 1440p maxed out, the cheapest GPU that could do it was an RX 7900 XT, which at the time was sitting around $620. That's the entry point for a comfortable 1440p experience in that game, and even then, the RTX 4090 was showing signs of being CPU limited at 1440p. Meaning the most powerful consumer GPU money can buy was sitting there being held back because the game couldn't distribute its workload properly. PC Guide confirmed it too. The RTX 4090 can't hit 4K 60 FPS without upscaling and frame generation. One card, the most expensive option, and it still needed a crutch. Now, Dragon's Dogma 2. It was released back in March of 2024, and Gamers Nexus literally titled their video on it, Dragon's Dogma 2 is a mess. And they're not even being dramatic about it. The GPU scaling in that game was almost non-existent in city areas. Your GPU could be sitting there almost doing nothing, and you'll still be watching your frames tank because the bottleneck was entirely on the CPU side. Capcom themselves had to issue a public statement acknowledging that CPU usage was higher than intended. Even with high-end setups, let's say an RTX 4090 paired with a Ryzen 9 5800X3D, we're still dropping into the 30s in a densely populated town. PC Gamer's review on a high-end setup was getting 40 FPS or lower regularly in Vermont, which you hit pretty early in the game, and DSO's gaming benchmark showed that at native 4K, the only GPUs that could deliver a somehow smooth experience was the RX 7900 XTX and the RTX 4090. And the 4090 was still dropping to 52 FPS in the tavern. Digital Trends tested with an RTX 4070 and a Ryzen 5800X3D on the lowest graphics preset and found that dropping from high settings to the absolute lowest only gave a handful of extra frames. And then Monster Hunter Wilds released in February 2025. DSO's gaming benchmark was brutal. At native 4K Ultra settings with no ray tracing, the only GPU that could maintain 60 FPS at all times was the RTX 5090. Not the 4090, the 5090. Nvidia's new flagship that launched the same month. And PC optimized settings confirmed that even with an RTX 4090, 4K Ultra without ray tracing was averaging less than 60 FPS. And the thing that really exposed how bad the optimization was in the settings scaling. On the RTX 5090, the difference between ultra and medium settings was only 6%. Yeah, 6%. The game is so poorly optimized that dropping every single graphical setting down does almost nothing to improve your performance. DSO Gaming called it out directly and said the game simply cannot scale and it doesn't virtually justify the enormous GPU requirements it's placing on players. Monster Hunter World, which came out in 2018, was reportedly seeing more concurrent Steam players than Wilds by December 2025. A 7-year-old game in the same franchise was pulling more players back in than the new one was retaining. That tells you everything. Now, I am on an RX 5700 XT. I'm not sitting here with an RTX 4090 acting like a detached observer. My GPU is old as shit, as I wanted to admit. And with these really terribly optimized games releasing, I just, accepted my fate that the only way I'll be able to play these modern games is by either finally upgrading my GPU or to play with the lower settings and setting the FSR to performance mode, which you know how bad that looks. Or, not play those games at all and just play indie games instead. But recently, something happened. It's how something terrible happened that caused something really good to happen. Okay, let me explain, but first could you please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel? Just, that'll be nice. Also, comment down below your current rig and tell me what you're currently playing right now. Alright, thanks. Resident Evil Requiem came out in February 2026 and Capcom dropped the PC specs ahead of launch, and people were actually confused. In a good way. The minimum GPU to run this game is a GTX 1660 or an RX 5500 XT, cards that are nearly 7 years old at this point. The recommended GPU, not minimum but recommended, is an RTX 2060 Super or an RX 6600. The 2060 Super launched in 2019 and the RX 6600 is in 2021. Capcom is telling you that a GPU from 5 or 7 years ago can run this brand new, visually impressive survival horror game. And this game genuinely looks great. Dense environments, complex lighting, detailed character models. This is not a last-gen looking game. On my RX 5700 XT, which sits comfortably above that recommended tier, Resident Evil Requiem just runs like it's supposed to. And I never felt so good. And even going below the official minimum spec, the legacy GPU benchmark show an RX 580, a card Capcom never officially promised to support, is still hitting a playable state with FSR enabled. That's headroom. That's what real optimization gives you. Not just hitting the floor, but having enough runway that even hardware below the official minimum can find something workable. Capcom has been consistent with their engine across all the Resident Evil games that they released, and it's the same story every time. Great visuals, modest hardware requirements, and smooth performance. And I know, I'm so sorry if I keep talking about this game, but
Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2,
Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. This is an open-world RPG set across 2 massive maps, dense medieval environments, full cities, complex NPC simulation running underneath everything at all times. And Larian Studios, the creator of the games, officially listed the minimum GPU as the GTX 1066GB or an RX 580. A GTX 1060 launched in 2016. That's a 9-year-old card listed as a minimum for one of the most graphically ambitious open-world games of 2025. Game Rant highlighted this specifically and called it genuinely impressive that hardware from that era could still participate in the experience at all. And DSO Gaming put KCD2 on their best optimized PC games of 2025 list, noting it can scale across a huge range of GPUs using its in-game graphics preset without major stuttering issues. And developers knows that optimization is a must now because here's what's currently happening in the hardware market. GPU prices are rising significantly and the reason is tied directly to AI. Data centers building out AI infrastructures are consuming massive volumes of graphics memory, and both AMD and Nvidia have been prioritizing that supply over consumer graphics because that's where the money is for them. Tom's Hardware confirmed that AMD notified supply chain partners of at least 10% price hike across its GPU lineup heading into 2026. With Nvidia expected to follow the same direction, Zotac publicly warned that the GPU component shortages threaten the very survival of GPU manufacturers and distributors. GameSpot's analysis stated that the shortage is expected to continue through all of 2026 and deep into 2027, and all that pressure lands directly on the players. If you have an older GPU like me, upgrading right now is either expensive or unavailable at a fair price, or both. The audience playing in 2026 is largely sitting on an older hardware, and the developer who understands their market knows that. Larian Studios, the team behind Baldur's Gate 3, a studio that has consistently made some of the best PC games in recent years, already said this out loud. Their CEO, when talking about their upcoming game Divinity, was direct about it. He said that the price of RAM and storage is something he's never experienced before. Described it as ruining all of their projections because normal hardware curves they could rely on for planning no longer apply, and confirmed that the component crisis means they're being forced to do significant optimization work in the early access that they had not originally planned for that at the stage of the development. That is one of the most respected studios in PC gaming, saying in plain language that the market conditions have changed how they build their games. And if Larian is saying it out loud, you can be absolutely certain that every other studio is having the same conversation internally. So, how will this affect the games coming out right now? Well, here's another example. Crimson Desert, which just came out, also have their own game engine. And the benchmark result from this game has been genuinely surprising in the best way. TechSpot tested 40 GPUs on it and came away impressed. At 1080p cinematic settings, which is the second highest preset and has ray tracing enabled by default, 6 GPUs maintained a constant 60 FPS, including the RX 6900 XT and the RTX 3080. That's a 2020 and a 2019 card respectively holding 60 FPS at high settings, and a brand new open-world action RPG. And not to mention, the minimum GPU requirement is a GTX 1060 and the RX 5500 XT. And some hardware CPU scaling tests that even with processors as old as i5-8500 and 8-year-old CPU, it could still hold the game together at 1080p without devolving into the kind of stuttery mess Dragon's Dogma 2 was. They described it as shocking that CPUs that old could hold up at all. But the Black Space engine just distributes its workload properly, so it never completely collapses on an old hardware. And here's the detail about Crimson Desert that I think is the most interesting technically. The ray tracing implementation in this game is so efficient that in certain areas, enabling ray tracing actually produces more frame rate than having it turned off. Like, I'm not even lying. The benchmark test confirmed that in some cases, the ray-traced version of the game runs faster than the rasterized version. The reason that, with ray tracing on, the lighting calculations get uploaded to the dedicated ray tracing hardware in your GPU, which frees up regular shader units to do everything else faster. Like, that is a developer actually understanding how their engine talks to the GPU at a hardware level, and using it to their advantage. Upscaling in Crimson Desert is available. It supports DLSS 4 and FSR 3, but it's off by default and it's positioned as an enhancement if you want extra frames, and not a requirement to make the game playable. And that distinction just shows how optimized this game really is. TechSpot compared Crimson Desert's optimization to KCD2's, which they called the benchmark for a well-optimized game in 2025. And they said Crimson Desert is in that same conversation. No shader compilation stutters, no crashes across the entire testing session, stable performance across wide range of hardware. So, what does all of this mean going forward? The pressure is creating this shift and it's not going away. The RAM and the other memory shortages is not resolving before 2027 at the earliest. That means that component prices are not coming down in any meaningful way in the near term. The reality is, the audience developers need to reach isn't the one that's running the latest hardware. Most players are on 3 to 5-year-old GPUs, either because they bought it before prices skyrocketed or because upgrading right now isn't just realistic. That makes optimization not just a nice to have, it's a smart business move. Studios that pay attention to this are building games that run well across a wide range of hardware, and that actually keeps the players engaged. A shortage or a crisis like this might seem bad at first glance, but it's forcing developers to adapt. They're rethinking how engines handle workloads, how shaders compile, and how games scale across older GPUs. And other studios has already acknowledged that they're designing their next game around this reality, making sure that the performance is solid before early access even start. And like heck, even Microsoft is on it too. The result? Players get better optimized games. Studios avoid unnecessary churn and the community as a whole benefits. The crunch of hardware shortages is nudging the industry to finally prioritize efficiency and scalability. Studios that embrace this gains broader audience that has older GPUs. Meanwhile, studios that ignore it are left wondering why their expensive, high-demand games aren't holding any players. Well, in other words, crises like this can actually do something good for gaming. They force developers to adapt, to optimize, and to think carefully about the hardware their audience actually owns. For those of us on older GPUs, this is a total win. The era of games being thoughtfully built to run on a wide range of setups isn't just returning. It's being accelerated by necessity. Anyway, so yeah, that's all for this video and I'll see you soon. Bye.